You're now listening to Sound Talent Media. Check out more shows at soundtalentmedia.com.
Hey, what's up, everyone? I'm Matt McGachy, the vocalist of Cryptopsy and the host of the Vox and Hops Metal Podcast, where I sit down with fellow metal musicians. We talk all about their lives and music while sharing killer craft beers. If you've ever wanted to sneak backstage and share a beer with one of your favorite musicians, well, Vox and Hops is the podcast for you. This week on the podcast, I dropped a killer episode with Kelly Schaefer of Atheist. There is this episode and over 440 other ones to help you enjoy life, metal, and craft beer. So what are you waiting for? It's time to become a Vox and Hops head. Cheers!
Hello and welcome to a fresh episode of the podcast. This one is intense. This one is gear nerdery to the next level. Tristan is just incredible. He's an incredible musician, engineer, etc. And we really nerd out on the gear on this one because he literally makes all of his instruments. So this is so cool. If you haven't checked out Author and Punisher, go give it a listen before you dive into this. Just grab a few tracks and give it a listen to give you an idea of what we're talking about here. You might even want to go check out some YouTube videos of him in action because we go into his instruments, how he uses them, how he made them, all this stuff. It's really fun. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. I want to get right into this one, but I want to give one more heads up. I'm probably going to do this on every episode until the date, but the date is February 9th. Something really fun is coming on February 9th, and the patrons of this podcast are going to be the very first people to know about it, followed by the text and newsletter subscribers. So if you are at all interested in fun guitar stuff, I definitely suggest getting on any of those platforms. The text and the newsletter are, of course, free. And yeah, it's going to be awesome. It's really going to be awesome. So there's another warning for you. That is how to stay in the know at the earliest possible time. The patrons know first, followed by the text and newsletter. So February 9th, mark your calendars, set your reminders. Something's coming. That's all I'm going to say. The boxes have been shipped out to reviewers and demo people and musicians and just various cool people. So yeah, it's happening. It's really happening. I can't wait for you all to see it. So, all right, without further ado, let's get into this episode with Tristan. Here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Tone Mob Podcast, the show about gear and guitar stuff sometimes. I'm your host, Blake Weiland, and with me today I have Tristan Shone, better known as Author and Punisher. What's going on, man?
Not much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. This is another one where I was introduced to your music on the podcast. So this was years and years ago. My friend Paul Roney was on, and he was talking about how you do things. And I was obviously immediately fascinated and hit the Google machine. This is like 2015, I think. And
Yep.
Following the project. And it as a hyper gear nerd, it's endlessly fascinating. But, you know, this is primarily a guitar based show. So it wouldn't be too shocking to me to find out that most of my audience wasn't familiar. So maybe we can go with the, 30,000 foot view backstory real quick and we can get into the nerdery.
Yeah, sounds good. So you want me to just sort of explain how I got into how Author and Punisher got started and stuff? Or?
Yeah, I'm sure you've talked about that a billion times at this point, but just to educate these folks real quick.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had always played in bands and, I would say in the vein, late 90s, starting in about 94, 95 in high school, I was into the heavier stuff and got into Sepultura, Melvin's, Neurosis, and I was sort of starting to play in bands. And I had a band called Empathy Test back then, and it was a drum machine band with a friend of mine, Sean McCumber, who coincidentally writes for Decibel now. But he and I had a drum machine band. It was a mix of sort of Fugazi mixed with a little Godflesh written beats and stuff.
Cool.
So then after that, when I got into college, I had another band called Falkirk, which we played in the Albany area. I was at RPI in Troy, New York. That lasted until about 2000. Then I moved to Boston for 4 years, working as a mechanical engineer at a company making like automation, robotics, telecom stuff. And it was just too dry for me. And I had a band out there that was a little bit more proggy, with like dueling guitars and harmonies, sort of Mastodon, Tool. Too complicated for me, to be quite honest, like too many notes. I've slowed things down. So, and the complexities of having a band and dealing with drummers and that smoke weed and, can't pay the rent for the studio, but find their, can always fill their pot collection. So then I was also working for an artist named Chris Csikszentmihalyi, and he was at the MIT Media Lab, and he's kind of doing big, large scale installations and sort of kinetic sculpture and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I was sort of working for him. I'd known him for a few years, on and off, helping him build his sculptures. And he was very technical too, so he actually taught me a lot of stuff too. And so when I was getting sick of working in industry, I had decided I was going to go back to grad school for art, and I could try to apply my mechanical engineering skills to a more creative avenue,
Yeah.
And so I applied to a bunch of schools, and I actually went to the school he went to, which was UCSD, which had a 3-year program, MFA. And it was the best decision of my life. I mean, I like surfing. I'm not that good, but it was like a combination of some mellow longboard surfing and working at the machine shop all week and developing Author and Punisher at this time. So that's when I started. The 3 songs from that band Born that I had before became the first 3 songs of Author and Punisher. So, and in that school, instead of developing sculpture, I sort of started building sound systems and building these machines. I loved the drum machine thing, but I didn't want it to be, I didn't want to press play. And I do that still on maybe 1 or 2 tracks an album or sequenced. I write the beats. I don't play them live. But I don't play those songs live. And so I was trying to find a live way to do all this stuff, play the drums so that it was electronic sounding, but physically organic, played live.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind of how it started.
It's super impressive to me because I have a mechanical background as well. I used to be a heavy equipment mechanic, and then I worked in the oil industry for a while. And so seeing some of this stuff, and then my friends, one of my best friends is actually a machinist. And so I've seen some of this stuff in action in other applications, like seeing the cable trays and seeing all the things. I'm like, oh, wow, this is a fascinating application of all this stuff. It tickles both sides of my brain in a really interesting way. But if I'm not mistaken, you were primarily playing guitar in these other bands, right? So how did you get into figuring out because outside looking in, the triggering of all the different instruments and software that you use is pretty complicated. This doesn't seem like something that you just wake up one day and, I know how to do this. Just learning, I'm just barely learning how to use some of the Electron synthesizers and things, and
those things are really complicated.
They are.
That's probably the most complicated one. So,
yeah.
So don't feel bad about that.
Okay, good.
Still struggling with those myself. I barely make them work properly.
Okay, good. That does make me feel a little bit better. But so what was the first foray into that? Because I don't imagine you just set up the mechanical system and just went for it. You probably started with pushing a couple buttons here and there.
Yeah, I mean, the drums were basically we're pretty simple. I trigger the drums. I have a controller that I slide back and forth. I've made 3 of them now. I like the second one the best, called the Rails, because it's a combination of being lightweight but still feels heavy. Mm-hmm. I can travel with it in a case under 50 pounds, so I can check it as luggage.
Oh wow!
That was a big transition point for me, from making the really large stuff to making sort of more practical. Okay, if I want to actually go tour, I can't bring that heavy stuff. Mm-hmm. Unless, on the Tool tour, I did bring it for 12 shows, and I won't do it again because it was, the stage managers hated it. It was a pain. It was just not practical. So maybe if I have a festival one-off thing, like, hey, we're going to pay to bring your big stuff to this festival because we want to see it or something. Okay, great, I'll do it. But so anyway, yeah, what happened was I was playing like bass and guitar, and you do that thing where you start to run your guitar into a splitter and, a bass cab and a guitar cab and two cabs. And so that's kind of where I was at with my drum machine. And I was also building, I sold my Mesa Boogie Dual rectifier, built my own trapezoidal 4x12 cab. So basically there was a guy in my grad school program, Matt Hope, and he's an artist, and he lives in China now, but he came from like UK German bass and house music, like rave scene in the UK. So for all those raves, they build their sound systems. They'll go into a warehouse and they'll bring a truckload of speakers in this weird combination, kind of like old dub reggae sound systems in Jamaica,
Yeah.
That's where I think that they brought that culture over to the UK, and then all the ravers started building their own sound system. So he taught me how to build those speakers and said, hey, we'll build you a trapezoidal cab for your guitar. It's 800 watts, more on sound, like PA level speakers, So that was where it started, is replacing all my speakers and then building subwoofers that were 18-inch folded horns. So I have two of those, and I still take those on the road sometimes. Super low end, like long projection.
Yeah.
And so then I started to basically just craft my own tone. So instead of using a guitar, I used a synth or a throttles. They're all pitch controllers, whether it's a keyboard controller, a sliding pitch controller, or these throttles, or the disc that spins. And I would map that into like a subtone. So like I would have a massive sub, that was like all under like 100 hertz.
Whoa.
30 to 100 hertz. And then I would layer on top of that, like a sawtooth wave with some distortion. And then I would run it out through two distortion pedals that would go to cabinets. And so, start to create this like multi-layered, spatial tone that is basically the same as a guitar and a bass tone. What your band would be like. Weed Eater, and I see them, they're almost like one player,
Totally.
Dixie and Shep will play the same thing all the time, and you can't really tell that so that's what I tried to do,
Mm-hmm. My audience will absolutely murder me if I don't ask what those distortion pedals were.
Oh, okay. Well, it's been all over the place, but when I, for the last tour, I'm just going to look this up because I always get the name of this one pedal wrong.
Oh man. This is exciting.
Oh yeah.
Well, I'm a massive pedal nerd. I have way too many pedals. And that's how when I'm doing my music, I'm primarily playing the pedals more so than the guitar. So it's an area that I find fascinating.
Okay. So I had one side. So like on the Tool tour, I had, I have my synth stuff that goes direct out of, I have a UA16 X16 sound card, which I use 14 of those outputs.
Wow.
So I don't run a stereo output. So two of them are my in-ears, and I run 16. So I have the kick on its own channel. So just like a normal band, I have a patch bay on the back of my rack, and I run the kick, the snare, the cymbals in stereo. The kick is mono, snares mono, cymbals in stereo. Then I have my synth tones, which are stereo. So that's like the low end heaviness. And then I have a sequence that's stereo, that's for rhythm. So, because I do have some accompanying sort of rhythmic stuff, like, just that I can't play live,
Right.
And I have a sequence of synthy stuff. That's a stereo. So that was that 2, 4, 6, 7, 8. Then I have 2 guitar tones that I run out, and one goes through an MXR bass DI.
Okay.
Which I actually, so yeah, let's see. Yeah, exactly. So one goes through an MXR bass DI, and then the other one goes through an electron analog drive pedal.
Oh.
And the reason I use some of those pedals is because the guitar distortion, and it's a lot of it has to do with it being line level, out of the UA.
Yeah.
Doesn't play well with like basic guitar distortion pedals.
Definitely.
But I use the radial, what is it? It's a radial splitter.
Mm-hmm. Like an API or?
Hold on, let me look it up. It's a green one. It's a passive box. Oh, what is it? I don't see it here now. I kept getting this buzzing, and because I sometimes split that tone to then go out to the PA as well, because it's also another tone that I use. So it's kind of a guitar sounding tone that goes into these pedals.
Yeah.
Just so that I play to the, sort of the strengths of the pedal. So yeah, a balanced mic splitter. So I'd run it in there and then split it out, because if I just used like a Y splitter cable, I'd get some weird buzzing on certain PAs and stuff.
Yep. Different ground systems or whatever.
Different ground systems. And so we before that Tool tour, man, we really, I really dorked out on getting my rack set up in a way that was rock solid, so that when everything was labeled and they would come in and plug the patch cable, the patch in the back, it was really easy. And then on stage, I had custom made 18-inch bins. So this is for the signal coming out of those distortion pedals. Obviously goes into a power amp.
Yep.
And then it would go to an 18-inch bin. And then I have a 12-inch scoop bin on top. A scoop is kind of like a reggae dub bin that it's for like low end stuff, but it kind of has like natural frequency suppression just by the shape of the horn and stuff.
Right.
And so I use that for a lot of like lower mid range. And so for that tone, it was perfect. So anyway, and I won't cross it over or anything. I just run it straight into, the sub on the 18-inch, I'll cross it over, 100. So it's just low. And then for the mid, I'll just leave it open. So it's kind of just like if you take your hand and cover the tweeter on your speakers at home a little bit, so it's just get a hint of the highs. But,
yeah. It's not just shredding your eardrums with ice picks type of thing. You're just attenuating it a little bit.
And then we would mic those cabinets on the stage. And so those are essentially my like guitar stacks.
Yeah.
Just so you get out of like digital land and the sound system a little bit, you get a little bit of, but to tell you the truth now, man, the second half of that tour, because we went to Australia and it was like kind of difficult. I had to really cut my gear down. So we went with a minimal setup and I ran direct with like neural DSP plugins.
Oh,
and dude, I could not feel the difference when I recorded it. I was like, why did I bring all that? But in a small club, I think you definitely would hear it. But in those big places,
there's so much sound bouncing around and so much natural reverb that happens. It's like,
right.
Yeah.
I would almost say it was better with the neural DSP in the big room because it was, my sound guy didn't come with me down there. So, getting the Tool guys gave me like they have like 4 sound people at the front, and you can hire their like, one of the other guys that's not their main sound dude to do your sound each night. And so I ended up doing that and it was great, but they hadn't toured with me and didn't know all the little tidbits about how it should blend, and they did great, but just different.
Right. It's a big learning curve. You're used to a traditional rock style instrumentation, and then you have to learn something completely out of your wheelhouse. So I get it. But you actually answered in some way my next question, because I just had Ken from Failure on, and he was, he's running all digital all the time these days, even in the studio. Yeah. And so I was thinking, and a lot of that was down to the reason a lot of guitarists have switched to those rigs, especially touring, is reliability and ease of use. And I'm thinking like your rig is so much more complicated than practically any guitarist almost. What do you do if you do run into a technical problem mid-set? Because you can't just unplug a pedal and be like, I'm running direct now. Like, you've got other things. So I have to imagine out of the hundreds of shows you've done, some wires got crossed somewhere. Like what do you do in those situations?
Oh, where to start? Endless problems. Let me start with the most recent problems. Well, first, I used to just use a stereo output on a PreSonus sound card because they were cheap sound cards you could get for like $500 for an 8 input, 8 output. It had mic preamps in it, so I could run my microphones, and I didn't have to bring a separate mic preamp. So like that's the sound card, the PreSonus Audio Box 1818 thing is rock solid. People will say the sound quality is not that great, but I mean, you can't tell unless you're recording a symphony with like really nice microphones. You know, I think for me, it's those sound cards. It's more about like driver quality, and you know, sometimes when they update Windows or update Mac, some of those cheaper companies, their drivers aren't always in line with the you know, with Mac, and that's where I think you run into problems. So if you never upgrade your computer or never update it, you can use those cheaper cards. So anyway. But I splurged and got this better sound card so that I could run everything out. And that was solving the first problem, which was like, you know, basically just at shows, you know, you have a sound system which really favors low end or really favors some frequency, and you've got a stereo for your entire mix, kick, vocals, guitar sounds, synths, and you can't change it, you know? So now it's like since I separate all the sounds out, the sound, most sound people know that a kick drum should sound like a kick drum. And so anyway, that was the first thing. You know, feedback on my microphone was a big thing. Like,
right.
I have a custom microphone that had these electret condenser mics that, so I replaced those with dynamic mics that were like near field, like unidirectional mics rather than these kind of omnidirectional, you know, like with a lapel mic, it's down sitting on your chest. And so you want it to pick up a lot of what's near you.
Yeah.
And that's what I was using. Well, I had to change that to using these really near field. So that helped a lot. I mean, the feedback was a huge problem for me. And then it was things like with the USB connections, because all of my devices are USB. So I'll have a powered USB hub in my rack, and every device plugs into it with a USB cable. Okay. And USB is like a little bit wiggly, you know?
Yes. So
you're on stage and like them getting pulled out wasn't so much the problem, but just like a little bit of jiggling. And then also with USB, if you have a cable for 30 shows in a row hanging off of the USB device, you get a little bit of the solder connections tend to start to get a little worn, and you get intermittent contacts. And every time, you know, if you use Ableton or use whatever DAW program you use, if you unplug and plug in a USB thing, your whole software freezes for a few seconds.
Yeah.
Until it connects or doesn't connect. And so that for me was changing all of my USB connections to be basically like it's an XLR type USB device, a Nutric device, connector.
Oh yeah.
So that it plugs into a rack mount thing that then has a patch bay of, you know, small USB cables that go to each device that don't have any weight or any, you know, and then taping each one of those things or clamping each one of those down. So, and then the same thing with my sound card, like never plug the snake into the back directly into the sound card inputs. You got to have a patch bay that they plug into.
Right.
Because the sound card would like eventually start to hang off, and then the connections would start buzzing and just, you know, so basically I've patch bayed the hell out of everything in my setup now.
Right. Just giving it that mechanical break, you know, so yeah, because the patch bays are stronger than the connections on the interfaces and stuff. And
yeah, and
you can change them out easier. If if that thing dies, then you can, rather than buying a whole new, you know, interface or sound card or whatever, you just redo the patch bay.
That was a huge thing. And my sound guy and I, John, used to like go, especially on the Weed Eater tour. Every like sixth show, we would have a situation where my outputs would just be shooting like a loud beeping noise on one output, and we could never figure it out. It was basically like the phantom power would be on, and the sound card it would blow my inputs. The second we would like, you know, Today Is the Day was playing, and the second I would plug their mic inputs into the back of my sound card, it would just blow the channel. So anyway, it was just learning that, you know, checking all these things. So Yeah, I'd say that was sort of, especially on Tool, I had one pedal, which was a Logity. I used this Logity MIDI pedal. That's the company, Logidy.
Mhm.
That is basically, it's 3 buttons that are MIDI programmable.
Yep.
And so it also has a sequencer option so that if you hit one button, you can just cycle through 8 different MIDI notes. And so for me, it was basically, as you hit it, it would just go this one, and it would just keep going through those 8. So that's how I trigger off each one of my songs, is with a foot pedal. So I can be like, hit the pedal and the song goes right into it, or I hit the pedal and it gives me a count off. And now I just take the whole circuit board and embed it in epoxy. And so that the thing can't move.
Nice.
And that was the only problem I had on that tour, technically.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, moving away from the gear side a little bit, I'm curious, like, you know, getting to open for Tool. I mean, they're clearly one of the biggest bands in the world. Like, how did that all come about?
Yeah, I mean, as you guys know, have you been to Stump Fest up there in Portland?
I know, but I do know about it. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
They do Stump. Ryan Stump is married to Danny Carey. So she and her sister have a festival up there. And although I never met Danny at the festival, I got to know them. You know, Yob and all these bands. Who else plays up there? The Body and so anyway, they live in LA, so they would come to my shows a couple times. Danny and Ryan, and then Adam Jones came to his show when I toured with Three Teeth, because they had taken Three Teeth out, and he knows Lex, singer from Three Teeth, pretty well. And that was the summer before they took me out. And then Maynard's wife, Jen Keenan, had me come play the Jerome Pussifer store, which is like kind of their vineyard and record store in Jerome, Arizona.
Oh yeah, right on.
Yeah, that was cool. Venue, not a venue. It's literally like a wine and record store.
That's awesome.
There, yeah.
I want to go there. That sounds awesome.
It's really cool. They have a barbershop there, and it's you know, they're a really cool group of folks up there. Just kind of carved out their own little world. It's pretty rad.
That's awesome. Super cool. Yeah. Was it a bit of a shock to the system to go to playing these big stadiums all of a sudden, or were you feeling pretty good about it by that point?
Well, I'm pretty used to playing. I love playing on big sound systems. Like when I get to play festivals, you know, that was probably the biggest shows I'd played have been like, I played Roskilde, which is this festival in near Copenhagen, and big open air Coachella type of thing. And I got to play in one of those tents, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000 people. And I loved it. Other than the stress of festival stress of getting on and off really quickly and with no sound check. But, so when I got to, other than just sort of being nervous about what the fans and what the environment would entail, once I got up on that stage and hit the first bass notes, it was rad. I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be good.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard a lot of people say like, oh, I caught him on that tour and it blew my mind. You know, that was I let the people in the Tone Mob Facebook group know you were coming on. There was a lot of people like, oh, I'm so excited for this episode. Like, I'll put in things and ask questions. And sometimes, especially when it's somebody like you that has a pretty decent sized audience, there won't be as many questions. You'll just be like, I don't care. I'm just stoked for this episode. And so there was a lot of that, but I did get some questions. So let me pull that up real quick.
Yeah, nice.
And we'll get into that so I don't get in trouble, because I do occasionally forget that I do that, and then I get in trouble with everybody and they're mad at me. So yeah, let's see. We got Dave Trombetti. This is an interesting question. Does inspiration for a machine come from the same place as inspiration for the music?
Well, I think I would say it probably does. I mean, you know, the machines don't always work out. So I'll have this idea for a long time, because you'll just be sort of sitting there, and when I'm feeling creative and sort of usually it's like when I'm on a hike or I'm like in the shower and I'm like, you know, on a Friday, and I'm like thinking about like, have to be in a good mood and sort of thinking about like, like that's when like melodies will come into my head, or like rhythms, and it always goes back to like some simple. I always am like, oh, I'm gonna really get simple in this next record, make this thing really, really simple riffs. And so there was this one called Gridiron, which was the rhythm controller that I most recently built, and it has like a stylus on the end of it, and it's actually an XY rather than just a straight back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
So there was basically, I would set up this whole grid of strips of aluminum that had machine grooves in it at different spacings. And so as I moved, and the stylus was on an encoder, as the X and Y was on an encoder, and I have the 8 buttons on the handle. And so I would be able to move this stylus into these grooves and sort of create these, like, I wanted to create this like really organic, industrial sounding like clang.
Yeah.
Almost like a,
Yeah.
And in theory, and I was like, oh man, this is going to be like new industrial. And in theory, it would work great, but it just, I don't know. It was kind of weird because it was almost like, it's like trying to drive your car over those little bumps in the road to make rhythms. But like, you have to calculate how fast you're moving and what the spacing is between the things. So anyway, that one was a little, I made some like miscalculations in my brain when I was making that thing somehow, because it never really worked the way I wanted to. But that was an idea where the music and the device were like one,
Right. That makes sense. And I think as much as like the machining aspect of it is technical, I think there's so much more overlap than it first appears on the surface. When I first heard about it, I was like, I don't even understand. But as I've gotten a little bit better at making music myself and like watching you in action now, I'm like, I can actually get my head around how this would happen. 5 years ago, I was like, this is absolutely insane. I don't know how anyone would ever do this. So all that pencils, that all makes sense.
Yep.
Let's see. All right, let's see what else we have for question. Ooh, you may have answered this somewhat already, but I think, and you did answer the second part of the question, I think. Noah Barnett, he says, I mean, obviously ask him what his favorite machine is that he's built. And also if there's a machine he built that he likes, but can't find a use for. I think you did answer that second part.
Yeah. Well, that one, I would say that one was definitely, and also the masks that I've built are some of these mechanical masks, or something that were, I had sort of thought maybe I would have on stage with me, but sort of practically with air compressors and wires coming off and actually miking the tone that was coming out of my voice when I had this like physical device opening and closing the air gap. And really just saw what I was doing. She's like, what's that motion? I'm like, when it didn't really match up. So those masks were like, they worked really well in like an acoustic gallery. We did a thing with a piano player, but for like, the chaos of live setting, it didn't really work.
Right.
But I was proud of it. I made it, I did it, I don't have to. And what was the first part of the question? Oh, the favorite device?
Yeah. Favorite device. Yeah.
I mean, it would just have to be the drum controller, the rails, the one that slides back and forth.
Yeah.
I machined the aluminum handle. The buttons are strange because they're really spiky and they dig into my fingers. But because of that, I it's much easier to locate them when I'm playing. So they're not like soft and like where you can't find them. These things are like, so sometimes when you pull the top off of a button and it's just that little plastic cylinder, it's like 2 millimeters in diameter.
Yep.
That's kind of what they are like.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yep.
I think I've seen some momentaries that are similar. I don't know if they're exactly the same, but
yeah. And that thing has just been rock solid for me, and it's really simple. And if I need to replace parts on it, they're easily to swap out and stuff. So
cool. Let's see what else we got here. We got Beastland, Such a Killer Album. We've got all kinds of like a lot of that. I'm so excited for this one.
Nice.
Let's see. We got Here we go. Okay, Joshua Dupree. I think this will be the last Facebook group question. Is there a dream instrument or device that you know you could bring to your set to the next level, but it's just too much?
Oh, device to bring me to the next level. I mean, yeah, I mean, obviously a lot of, if I had sort of budget that a Tool or a certain band had, and I could really, or Rammstein or something. I always think about like, if I could get a setup to that point, I would probably splurge a little bit and go with some of the more elaborate designs that were heavy and not thinking about how I'm going to fly it over somewhere,
Right.
Because so much of what I do is limited by that, which to tell you the truth, I'm almost relieved that isn't the case, because then it's like, where do you stop? And the pressure to have this sort of ridiculous stage setup would be always there, and half the people might just be into like, not into the music, but into looking at this sort of, Burning Man, Author and Punisher setup. Whereas for me, some of it is nice, just how simple I've got my road set up to be, because I can focus more on the music and not on robots running around. And,
That was actually going to be a question I was going to segue into, is how much of your design is predicated on it looking cool on stage versus, actually being, I mean, it's all functional. Clearly you wouldn't make it if it didn't work, but how much of it is an aesthetic consideration?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I really, obviously I work as an engineer. So like some of that stuff, there's a certain cleanliness in the aesthetic in terms of like, if I'm going to make parts out of aluminum, I'm going to chamfer the edges and I'm going to make them a certain shape. But in terms of, I can tell you what every single part on them, does, it's functional, whether it's to just sort of, as you were saying, with like the wire carriers, the chains, and there's a bellows that cover my electronics. And that's exactly what they use in the robotics industry, like underneath mills. They move in X and Y. They have that kind of bellow camera vinyl protection, so chips don't get into the gears and everything. So it kind of just works to my advantage that the aesthetic of the engineering stuff is something that people in the audience aren't used to seeing, whereas I see it every day at my job in any sort of motion control application.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like that. That's my aesthetic, but I surprisingly don't make that many choices. Like, we're actually talking yesterday about this sort of, because we can get into this, but for the gear company that's coming, that we're designing the stuff for now. That's the next thing I want to talk about. So let's just there's right into it. There's some choices there that we can make now that are maybe a little different than I would have, that I have done things in the past. And so we're at that point now where the things are designed, at least the first round, they're pretty much like already, we've manufactured little prototypes and, really messed around with each key and knob and things. But the look, like, are we going to powder coat these? Are we going to use steel or brushed aluminum? Or are we going to, all these sorts of decisions, which are really the fun things. Yes. Because like the coating that you use on the case, you need a coating because otherwise the steel or the aluminum will get scratched. So there's so many fun options there, Oh yes. Yeah. and from a sort of an engineering perspective, like I hate things like when people rubberize plastic to make it have a grip. I'm like, well, I don't want to use, there's just like little decisions there that I wouldn't ever make. Or like anodized red and blue. I hate those. Like the people make like anodized aluminum flashlights. So we're sort of like trying to figure that out. Anyway, it's fun. Yeah. Can you give us some idea of what the first products are going to be from that, or is that still kind of under wraps? Yeah, we can talk about it. Really, they're going to be based on the current instruments that I made, because these ones that I'm using now were pretty much refined versions of previous things I had made.
Okay.
So it's kind of been like slowly refining these really rough designs and ideas that I had into something now that can be like not mass produced, but produced in quantity. And like, obviously the electronics need to be encased now, and we want to have like outputs for like CV for modular synths. We're going to have USB-C instead of USB A and B. We're going to have, because the connector is better, MIDI in, MIDI out. There'll be Ethernet, although it's Ethernet capable, so that you can send OSC or MIDI over Ethernet, or power the device over Ethernet. So like,
cool. Yeah.
For me, having my devices all be like connected to an Ethernet hub, and then powered through that same connection. That's a really like long range communication protocol, and it's a much more rigid, with the snap-in Ethernet cable.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's, sorry, I went through like the connections and the outputs, but the actual devices will be, they'll be like, I have this one called the mini rack, and we're still coming up with a name for that, but it's essentially a sliding key that is really simple. Those two keys, mine are just touch sensitive, but the new ones will have, like after touch sensitivity, velocity sensitivity, and also a little bit of in addition to sliding this way, you'll be able to get a little bit of extra motion in the Y.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an encoder that reads it this way, and then one that's this way, and the touch sensitivity. And the reason we're doing extra axis, a little bit of motion, is this thing called MPE, which is it's MPE MIDI. Sorry,
this is educational for everybody right now. This is
MIDI
great.
polyphonic expression, which is recent developments in MIDI. As a method of using enable multi-dimensional controllers. And it has ends up being a more like organic sound, because you're getting 3 streams of MIDI like expression data at the same time.
Yeah.
And so some software now have been or some software synths and Ableton now, you'll notice at the bottom they'll have like a MPE button or MPE enabled. So the guy, Jason Began, who's the Viter, who's like our synth guy in the company, he also produced the record. There were certain things he's like, we have to have. So we need to have 3 streams of data on like every device.
That's exciting.
So that's a sliding key. And then the other one is just a knob. It sounds really boring, but when you take a knob and it's either, it's probably, 4 or 5 inches in diameter and 4 inches thick, very heavy. Mine are aluminum that I use now, but we'll have them in wood, stone, granite, raw steel.
Cool.
And it's a knob that has ball bearings and a shaft, and very well supported on the back side, so that, if you spin this thing, it will spin for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to use that control pitch, or use it as a drone knob, or just use it as a simple knob controller, capacitive touch and things like that. So just being able to, for someone, even a guitar player, to have a knob, or a Pioneer deck, so you could have a knob.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third and last one that were, at least to start out, these are just the initial products. It's one called the Ingot, which is exactly like one that I already use. It's basically like a disc of aluminum or steel or wood or stone that spins and slides on a shaft. So you can spin it, use it as like a drone knob, or use it as a swell. And then you can also, slide, and you can have that be pitch data. So between those 3 things, we just hope that people will incorporate these into like their current, whatever their rig is. If they're studio and they want to slot it 19 inches into a rack in their modular gear, or you can just hook it up to a computer, or you can hook it up to an Electron synth and have it be the controller for the sound.
Yeah, definitely. No, this is this is ticking a lot of boxes for me. I'm like, wow, this sounds so much fun.
Yeah, I mean, some people will probably be a little, I think sometimes people that are guitar oriented, they want something that they can make sound with. And so these are open source. You can program these to output sound if you want, but it's a teensy, which is it's like an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi.
Mm-hmm.
It's a programmable, so you can program these to output basic sound, but maybe eventually we'll have synth engines in our devices so that we could get Make Noise or some company to design us a sound module to put in so that this thing outputs sound like an analog synth.
Right.
But for now, it is a controller.
I'm thinking about how to hook some of this stuff up to some of my crazier pedals that have MIDI inputs. So some of my Chase Bliss stuff or the specifically the hologram electronics microcosm is what I'm envisioning. I'm like, oh man, because I could plug into that and output to a stereo rig. And because what I do is I'll set a bunch of pedals up on the table, and I'll have this idiotic rig, just this running cables all over the place and outputting to multiple amplifiers. And I'm playing the guitar, but I reach forward and I'm twisting knobs in the middle of things and play. And so this is like, oh man, to be able to control some of this stuff in a really organic way.
Right.
Like you were talking about the knob and how it's like, that sounds simple. I'm like, that sounds perfect. Well,
it's something, awesome. It's a weird thing because I think a lot of times, it's like my big disc that I made, that thing is, people say, well, why does it need to be so big? And why does it need to be so heavy? I'm like, okay, well, if you put it on a really nice bearing and I get this thing up to speed, it will stay spinning for a while and then it will slowly slow down. Mm-hmm. And so you could do that manually. So you could slow it down with your hands and, and sort of that curve of pitch over time will, because I have it right now, the faster it goes, the higher the pitch. So it'll be a note on, and then if you slow it down, but if that were made of plastic, you would be able to slow it down very fast.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you can hear how there's no rotational inertia in the device, So now by making these things heavier and having weight, and it's the same with my handle that I slide back and forth. If it were too light, then so the distance between the beats would be difficult for me to control. Whereas now I'm just kind of the weight and the distance, it's a very natural, it requires force from my arm to slide it.
Yeah.
So it's on par with my level of strength, whereas if these things are too small, we're constantly having to restrain our physical ability, oh, I'm going to turn this tiny little knob and with my whole body's weight, wait, it's too small.
Well, I'm equating it to the difference between a cheap Casio keyboard and a nice piano with weighted keys, the physical reaction of how that feels. Or if you're trying to play, in drop C and you're using a set of sevens, it doesn't it doesn't respond the way you want it to or feel correctly. So I totally get the whole idea behind your setup is to bring physicality to electronic music, right? That's the whole idea, is try to make it more interactive in the real world, not just in buttons and sliders and things. It's you're actually grabbing a hold of that note and making it into a real physical experience for yourself and for the audience. And so, I mean, as soon as I saw the stone wheel, I was like, yeah, I get it. Or the big disc, I get it.
Some people, and it is it does take this sort of, leap of faith, because you do need to also design a sound. I think some people I've seen people sort of send me hey, I built a sliding controller or something, hey, I want to show you. And they'll DIY to some, linear slide with a button and then they'll use it, or they'll make a pitch controller. But then you have to still design a sound that sort of feels good with that tone,
Totally.
You can't have a slide whistle sound I mean, you could. yeah, there's that whole side of things too. Like, so I think finding your own personal ways to, that's why I'm kind of excited to see is like, how will people use these? Because I don't think they're going to use them like I use them. I mean, also industrial doom metal is not the most popular genre. So it'll be, I expect it to be some people more maybe in the techno and EDM or hip hop or some stuff like that. Producers will find ways to be a little bit more organic with some of their pitch controllers and stuff.
Yeah. No, I'm already, the brain's already firing. I'm on the mailing list. I'm ready.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're still waiting for a lot of parts and stuff right now because that whole thing is electronic parts are hard to get right now. So we're just waiting and keep like refining prototypes until we can get the.
Yeah. So I have a couple things I want to get into, but we've talked obviously a ton about your rig and your gear. Do you still play guitar?
Well, it's funny you asked that. My brother started, at 50 years old, he started playing guitar. And I sent him the Yamaha that I bought back in like 95 because I wasn't really playing it. And he kind of tricked me because he said it was for my nephew. I was like, oh, okay, cool. And then my nephew was like, that's for my dad. So I was like, oh, okay. So I just gave you a guitar.
Right.
But I'm super happy because my dad and I were always playing when we were growing up. And so now he is. So and he's pretty good. And we go back and play Neil Young songs. So now I'm thinking about getting an acoustic again.
Oh, yeah.
But I got a Les Paul Custom 1979 that I bought back in like the mid 90s, and I still have it.
Adam Jones.
Yeah, exactly. Except that I did some things to it maybe back then that I shouldn't have, like replaced the tuners to locking tuners, and I put EMGs in there because I wanted to sound like Meshuggah. But what are you gonna do?
That's all right. Yeah, it's it. It's funny that you bring that up with 79 because I'm after the Adam Jones one came out. Like I have an 81 custom. It's white, but it's so it's not the silver burst that I woke up and everyone's tagging me like, did you see what happened to the prices of Les Paul customs on Reverb? And it was like literally like overnight, everybody that had a silver burst all of a sudden was like, well, mine's worth $4 million now because the Adam Jones ones came out. Not 4 million. I'm exaggerating.
Yeah, a lot of money.
But they jumped from like, something that was reasonably attainable to something fairly expensive. And then even mine like doubled, even though it's not the silver burst. And I was just like, well, I'm glad I got this when I did because Adam just went ahead and wrecked the 79 to 82 Les Paul custom market. It's kind of insane. So like, even though you've tweaked yours, I bet it's still a fairly valuable instrument at this point. So, and pickups,
I'll never get
tuners. That's easy. That's nothing. That's nothing major. That's easy.
I think somebody could go in and just fill them in and re-lacquer it, or who the hell knows. But I'm not going to sell it. I love the thing. It's so heavy.
Yeah.
I had so many guitars over the years. I wish I didn't get rid of. I had some weird like Ibanez, like banana, like gold. That looked like a Les Paul, but it was an Ibanez, just ornate kind of thing. And it was a weird device. I don't know that they ever even made anything like that, but I bought it for a few $100 and then I sold it. I shouldn't have sold it. It was weird and cool.
Weird and cool. I get it. So I do want to talk about the new record just a little bit before we dive into the classic questions that I wrap this thing up with, but
yeah.
So the new record, I've only heard the two singles so far and love them, but it is quite a departure. Like you seem to be exploring like a less wall of sound approach and going into like more dynamic texture-y based things. And it's a really interesting, like the first time I sent one of my friends, some of your older material, he's like, man, this is like awesome and scary. And and then I hear the new stuff and it's like, this is very huge and anthemic and like cinematic sounding, but it's pretty. It's kind of a different thing. Is this just a product of, I've done that already, let's try something new, or where's this coming from?
Well, in some ways, the low for me, like the heaviness, that for me is like, I'm really happy with where that's at on this record. I was able to really get that mixture of sub mixed with those other heavier tones, but giving it this really wide, it's a wide berth. Like it sounds like it's in stereo, and the low end feels like it's just like this fog that's all over the floor. And for me, that's like that was a triumph to be able to get that sound and have that sound how I wanted it. So heaviness wise, I feel like it's like really heavy, and it hits the subs, if you have subs, really nicely. And so then for me, that was like most of the problem solved. And so then the vocals, after listening to my performances on Tool's tour, like I recorded them all and released that live record. I really got to listen to me in the best possible scenario, and I had the sound guys, I had the best sound system. I bought all this gear so I could really be honest, coming back from the pandemic, and had a little time and just be like, okay, what worked and what didn't work? What's working for me? And one thing was just like trying to make the vocals blend better with the music. I always feel like when I'm playing, the vocals were like this weird little thing up here, and the rest of the music kind of fit, but the vocals. So for me, like, it was like, okay, let's completely redo I got a new microphone now. I got rid of my other one. I still have it, but I've designed a new one that has the new microphones that really you can hear the inflections of your voice better. I really wanted, when I would go listen to bands like James Blake, a different genre, but like James Blake, or I remember seeing like Air or like Everything But the Girl, and how these are totally like synth bands. But how the voice, you can really hear like the breath of the voice in it. I wanted my presence of my voice to be like that, rather than with distortion on it, like sounding like we're going through like a megaphone. So that's where I started, and screaming wasn't working. So singing, once I recorded all the songs, walking around, the melodies were much more like synth melodies than they were like aggressive, angsty vocals.
Yeah. That's one thing that really stands out. Is it's cool to hear you describe it, because it does seem like the vocals came to the forefront versus being kind of somewhat of an afterthought. Not that they necessarily were, but it seems like they were really the focus of this. And I don't think that's normally what people expect out of you. So I think that's a cool departure. And at the same time, it's still an Author and Punisher song. Like, it doesn't sound like it's not you. It's just a new side, which is cool.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I'm happy with it. I'm now practicing, a lot. And so really, with tours getting canceled, I've had some more time now, to really like sit in the studio and sing along with it. And getting the in-ear monitor system, Tools monitor guys really helped me, because I got to listen to Maynard's mix one night and sort of see what he hears, so getting rid of a lot of the kick drum in my in-ears and getting rid of a lot of anything below like 150 hertz, and then sort of EQing my voice without any effects in my ears, which makes for kind of a dull listening experience for me while I play live.
Right.
Because I'm so used to making as much bass as I, in my ears. I want to be like flooded, but then I wasn't singing on pitch. And so I really had to change my in-ears. And so coming back from that tour and having sort of improved that setup, now I have a lot more confidence about it.
Cool. Very cool.
And then for the sound, just the difference in sound, like I have some collaborators, obviously Danny and Justin from Tool played, and that really made those tracks unique, having live drums and live bass with things that I haven't had for a long time. But I would say Phil Scrosso, who played guitar on the whole album, and wrote all the guitar parts, melodies. And then Jason Beggins did a lot of the electronic. I wrote a lot of the electronic stuff, but he wrote a lot of electronic stuff too. Little sound textures and synth lines like that we used. I would write them with VSTs or a couple electron synths. I didn't spend a lot of time sound designing. Jason is a synth guy, and we went and ran each synth line out through like 7 different runs with different combinations, and then I would pick through and pick and choose. So I don't think there's many parts on the record where it's like textureless, you know?
Yeah. I'm very excited to hear the whole thing. I'm very, very excited about it. So
yeah, it's more of the same, you know?
Yeah. Cool.
Hopefully people dig it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're nearing the end of the main episode of the podcast. And there are a couple of classic questions I like to wrap things up on. But before I do that, this is a chance where I like to give the guests a chance to, shout out their Aunt Tilly. They can plug whatever they want to plug. Anything you want to say to, a few thousand people right now, this is your opportunity to do so. So go for it.
Okay. Well, yeah. First, I'd like to shout out to Augie Arredondo, who connected me with you. He's Augie's. If you've ever watched Terrorbird video or Shame or most of my videos, he did the Nile Strength video on Beastland. Augie's a great filmmaker and video editor, and does a lot of color and also horror movie. And we're good friends, and we just we're gonna make a video probably for this album too, but a little bit later once we get some of the new gear, because I really want to. He shot some car commercials and stuff, and I want to use that I want to get really down and dirty through the gear, and so yeah. Cool. And then I guess the other thing, just drum machines are coming out soon. So look at the follow, give us a follow _drum machines _ and you'll start to see these coming out, and I'll have them on tour, and hopefully these tours happen. So go to authorandpunisher.com. You can look at the tour schedule. Perfect. Yeah. Shout out Augie. Thank you for making this happen. And for the listeners of this podcast, Augie, he's on the text chat, and that is literally how this happened. So that is in the show notes. That's my little plug. You never know what can happen if you join the text chat, because it does come directly to me, and I respond to every single person. So yeah, hit that up if you want to talk to me. All right, last questions. So first one, I'll be really curious to see where you go with this one. What is your favorite Boss pedal? Oh man, that's a good question. I'm going to first say I have a guitar player now, and it's not Phil, because Phil tours with his own band a lot, but Doug Sabolic is from Ecstatic Vision and also Life Once Lost. He'll be touring with me. And so we've been trying to figure out the tone, and Phil used HM2 pedal on a lot of the lower heavy stuff. And so I just bought one of those and a couple of Boss delay and reverb and a mute pedal, and sent them to Doug so that we could try to recreate what Phil did on this record. So we're going to try that out. But I would say for me personally, I really liked the, when I was just starting doing the guitar drum machine stuff, I was using Metal Zone and Delay Verb. I don't remember which one it was, but that's how I started. That was my basement, metal setup. That's awesome. And the SR16 Elisa's drum machine. There you go. Perfect. Okay, this is the last question. This is the one that gets a little bit dicey, a little bit controversial, but we'll get into it. Controversial. And this actually lines up because I was watching an interview that you did. I think I'm not sure exactly what the situation was, because it was really late at night when I was watching it. But I think I sent the clip to Augie. You were making pizza. So the last question is, what is your favorite kind of pizza? I thought you were going to ask. There's a couple of things I thought you were going to get into. Now you're speaking my language. Favorite type of pizza? I mean, I would have to say that the basic, just Neapolitan style is really my go-to. It's kind of the Holland's Opus, or like the one that I've been trying to make. Yeah. Detroit pizza is too easy. Mm-hmm. Now that I've got a good stove set up in the stone, because you can just do it in the pan and you fill it up with all the, my wife is looking, she's so sick of me talking about pizza. Oh, well, I'm not. So, So Detroit is not, but the Neapolitan style, now that I've got the pizza peel and, the semolina and, the right flour, double O flour, and the 2-day rise and getting that combination. So that's really what I like, getting the black bubbles on the top of the crust, getting the perfect bend when you pull it off, and just that good sort of fermented flavor in the dough. And but it's tough. My wife's, my mother-in-law's stove and my parents' stove are hard to work with. So when you're making it at home, you don't have a pizza oven. It gets a little inconsistent and difficult.
Yeah. I talk about pizza on every episode. I'm a pizza fiend. I'm wearing my Frank Pepe t-shirt today. So, it's pizza is a big part of the podcast. And so for my 30th birthday here a few years ago, some of the listeners got together and got me one of those Uni pizza ovens, the little, this was the earlier iteration of them. They've changed them a little bit, but I can tell you the thing is a lot of fun for the home pizza chef. It gets you some, it takes a while to master, but it does get you some, and I have not mastered it, but I occasionally, blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while, and I pull something off of there. I'm like, I can't believe I did this. This is so good. So I definitely check one of those out. If you're a home pizza enthusiast, check out those Uni ovens. They're pretty. Yeah,
because I imagine it gets you. I've been using the broiler lately. I will basically move the stone right up under the broiler and cook it under there, and it's amazing how much better it is at the higher temperature with the same exact dough. I've done tests where I move it to the middle and do 450 or 500 and cook a pizza, or I cook it, and that takes about 10 minutes. And then if I do it right up on the broiler, it takes about 3 minutes, and I have to turn it in the middle. Yep. It's crazy to have a pizza cook that fast.
Yeah. That's definitely the Uni experience, because it's a wood. Well, you can get it with gas, but mine's a wood pellet situation.
Oh, yours is? Oh,
yeah.
shit.
So you load it up with the wood pellets, and then you light it with a torch through this little hole, and then it starts the draw, and everything heats up, and it heats up super, super hot. And so you do it. It's like a mini version of being like a real pizza chef. You slide it in there on the stone, you let it cook for a minute and a half, you open it, give it a spin, and then you pull it off. And it's like, again, sometimes it takes there's a learning curve to it, but it's small and portable. It's like, and mine, I don't know what the new ones are like exactly, but mine will break down to where it can fit. Like you could put it, in a like a cupboard or something. If you wanted to, you could take the smokestack off of it. And I pretty much leave mine set up, but they're very, very easy to deal with. So
that's awesome.
As an appliance goes.
Yeah, I'm going to take a look at that. That's a good suggestion. I think Augie actually got one of those. So rad.
Cool, man. Well, thank you so much for hanging out. This was awesome. We'll slide over to Patreon and, maybe we'll talk about some more nonsense.
Yeah, that sounds good. I love talking gear, so it's sometimes nice to have a focus on a podcast. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you so much. All right, everybody. For Tristan, this is Blake, and as always, folks, good luck and good tones. There you have it, folks. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Definitely go check out some live performances of Tristan in action, because it's really impressive, really, really cool stuff. I think he's doing something truly unique, and that can be difficult to find these days. So go give it a stream, give it a listen, give it a watch, enjoy it. And if you would like to hear more, well, we talked for a little bit longer over on Patreon. So if you would like to support the show and get extra content delivered to your ears, that's a great way to do so. You can go over to patreon.com/tonemob, and $5 a month will get you extra content every single week. So thank you to the patrons. Seriously, it helps so much. I can't even begin to tell you how much this helps. It's incredible. So thank you for supporting the show. Please share this with a friend, all that good stuff, and I will talk to you next time. Bye-bye. One last thing before we totally sign off here. I just want to remind you that if you do any shopping at Stringjoy, that's Stringjoy guitar strings made in Nashville, that will help me out as well. As I've said for years, I'm heavily involved in that company, and I really do think they're making the best products on the market. So if you would like to try custom strings, go to tonemob.com/stringjoy and check them out today. I seriously love what the team down there is doing. I help them out with all kinds of things, and by you supporting them, you are also supporting me as well. And hey, you need some strings, so why not get some custom strings just for your guitar and playing style? Again, the link for that is tonemob.com/stringjoy, and that will take you right to their website, and you can do all your shopping through there, and that will help everyone involved out. So thank you very much. Talk to you next time. We are brought to you by the wonderful folks at Gun Street Wiring Shop. Yes, Gun Street Wiring Shop. I've talked about them before. I used to say based out of Bend, Oregon, but guess what? Sean moved to my neck of the woods. Sean's in Portland. Sean is awesome and has helped me with a bunch of stuff lately. And if you have wiring needs for your guitar, he can help you too. If you want to get weird with it, he can get weird. If you just need to spruce things up a little bit, there's your guy. He takes all the guesswork out of doing your guitar wiring, and he makes it simple, and his customer service is top-notch, and I can't say enough good things about Gun Street as a company. I really respect Sean and what he's all about, and the product is top-notch. I've got 3 different guitars that now have Gun Street harnesses in them, and I could not be happier. So go to gunstreetwiringshop.com and check them out.